I was sitting in that doctor's office, minding my own business, when my phone started buzzing like a hornet in a jar. It was my daughter, Tessa. I almost didn't pick up. She never called unless she needed something, but that day, that call changed everything. "Mom," she said, her voice a little too calm. "I just wanted to let you know, don't freak out, okay? But I sold the mountain house." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. The words didn't fit together in my mind. Sold? Mountain house? She might as well have said she sold the moon. "What did you just say?" I whispered, my hand tightening around my purse. The waiting room suddenly felt too small, too bright, too quiet. "I sold the house, Mom," she repeated, a hint of impatience creeping into her tone. "You weren't using it anyway." And I thought, the market's great right now. Why let it sit there? My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and throat. That house wasn't just some extra property. It was the place my late husband Harold and I built with our bare hands. He used to joke that it was where the mountains kept our secrets. Every board, every nail had his fingerprints on it. It was where we went to breathe after life got too loud. And now my daughter was telling me she'd sold it like it was an old couch. "Tessa," I said slowly, trying to stay calm, "you didn't have the right to sell it. That house." "Mom, relax," she cut in. "You gave me power of attorney years ago, remember? It's all legal. I took care of the paperwork." My stomach turned. I could still hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. My pulse pounded in my ears so loud it drowned out the nurse calling someone's name. Power of attorney. Lord help me, I had signed that paper back when I had my knee surgery. I trusted her to handle the bills and bank stuff. I never imagined she'd use it to strip away my home. "What about my car?" I asked quietly, though I already felt the answer coming like a wave I couldn't stop. She hesitated, just for a second. Then, I sold that too. You barely drive anymore, Mom, and honestly, the upkeep was ridiculous. My old Chevy was nothing fancy, but it had taken me everywhere, from Sunday service to grocery runs to those quiet mountain mornings. Losing that was like losing a piece of my freedom. "You sold my car," I said, barely breathing. "Don't make this dramatic," she sighed. "It's just stuff, Mom. I needed the money for something important." My heart stilled. Something important. There was a beat of silence. Then she said it so casually it almost didn't register. "I'm going to Europe for a few months. I need a break from all the stress. You'll be fine. You've got your savings." The words fell like stones in my chest. I wanted to laugh, scream, or hang up. But I couldn't do any of those things. I just sat there, my old leather purse pressed against my chest, staring at the framed poster on the wall that said, "Healthy mind, healthy heart." "Tessa," I murmured, my voice trembling now, "your father would be." "Oh, please, Mom," she snapped. "Don't bring Dad into this. You always use him as a guilt trip." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight, like every unspoken word I'd ever swallowed was fighting to come out all at once. People say betrayal feels like a knife. But that's not true. It's colder than that. It's like frost creeping under your skin, numbing everything you thought was warm and safe. I'd always thought Tessa and I were close. Sure, she'd gotten distant after Harold passed, but I figured grief just changed people. I never dreamed it would turn her into someone who'd sell the last piece of her father's legacy. When the nurse finally called my name, I stood up on shaky legs. My hands were trembling so bad I had to tuck them under my cardigan. I told the nurse I'd be right there, then turned my face toward the window. Outside, the sun was shining bright against the parked cars, but it looked strange, too harsh, too sharp, like the light had turned mean. "Tessa," I said softly into the phone, "how much did you get for it?" She gave a little laugh. "Enough. Don't worry about it. I'll send you the details later." And just like that, she hung up. No apology, no hesitation, just the click of disconnection. I sat back down, the phone still in my hand. Around me, life kept moving. Magazines flipping, children whining, a nurse calling another name, but I felt like I'd been pulled underwater. That house was where Harold and I used to sit on the porch every fall, wrapped in flannel blankets, sipping hot cocoa and watching the fog roll down the hills. I could almost smell the pine trees and smoke from the old stone fireplace. I could hear his laugh, deep and easy, the way it used to echo through the cabin. And now, some stranger was probably walking through it, opening our cupboards, breathing our memories. It took me a long while to realize I was crying. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that rolled down my face like they'd been waiting for years. When I finally went into the doctor's office, I don't remember much of what he said. Something about blood pressure, about stress. But I was only half there. My mind was still on that mountain, the one I'd just lost. That night, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, staring at the old photo of Harold and me, our hands covered in paint from when we built the cabin. I whispered to that picture like he could hear me. "They took it, Harold. She sold our home." The silence that followed was heavier than any words I could have spoken. But even in that moment of heartbreak, a tiny ember of something else began to glow deep inside me. Not anger exactly, but something sharper. Something that whispered, "This isn't over yet." Because if Tessa thought she'd sold my story along with that mountain house, she was about to learn. I still knew how to write my own ending. That night, the house was so still, I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, like it was counting my thoughts. The rain had started somewhere around midnight, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the roof like fingers tapping a wound I couldn't ignore. I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of tea I hadn't touched, watching the streetlight reflect on puddles outside, my own reflection staring back at me, older, wearier, and somehow smaller than I remembered. The mountain house. Harold's house. My house. Gone. Every sound in the room seemed to echo that word. Gone. It's strange how betrayal can sit in a room with you like another person. Silent, breathing, watching. I felt it across from me at the table where Tessa used to sit doing homework, her messy curls falling in her eyes. She used to giggle when Harold snuck cookies onto her plate, pretending I didn't see. That little girl was gone too. Somewhere between grief and adulthood, she'd turned into someone I didn't recognize. I thought about calling her back. My thumb hovered over her name on the phone screen more than once. But what would I even say? "You broke me? You sold the last piece of your father I had left?" No, words wouldn't fix what she'd done. Instead, I sat there and let the storm outside match the one inside me. Around 2 a.m., I went to Harold's old desk. It still smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco, the way he liked his pipe. The drawer stuck a little before it opened, same as always. Inside were neat stacks of yellowed papers, faded receipts, and a small wooden box I hadn't opened since the funeral. I hesitated. My fingers brushed over the lid. It was carved with a single letter, H. When I lifted it, a faint creak escaped, like it had been waiting to be opened again. Inside were his old pocket knife, a watch that no longer ticked, and a folded envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Strong, slanted, unmistakable. I hadn't seen that envelope in years. For a moment, I just stared at it. The ink had smudged a little on one corner, like he'd sealed it in a hurry. My chest tightened. Harold wasn't a man of many words, but when he did write something down, it meant he'd put his whole heart into it. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "Nell," it began. "No dear, no fuss, just my name. If you're reading this, I guess I'm gone. I hope you're taking care of yourself. Don't let grief turn you small. You are always stronger than you thought. If things ever get hard, look under the cabin floorboards, the corner by the fireplace. I left something there for you, something to make sure you'll be all right. Love you, always. H." I read it twice. Then again, "Look under the cabin floorboards." My heart began to race. I hadn't been up to that cabin since Harold passed, not once. The idea of walking into that space without him was too painful. But now, that letter felt like a key to something bigger than grief. Maybe Harold had known someday I'd need help. Maybe he'd seen this moment coming, long before I ever did. I pressed the letter to my chest and let out a long breath that felt like the first real one I'd taken all day. The next morning, I called the realtor Tessa had used. Her name was Carla. Sweet, polite voice, like honey over ice. When I told her who I was, there was a pause. "Oh, Mrs. Harlan," she said carefully. "Yes, I handled the sale of the property." "Congratulations on the quick turnaround. It's sold fast." Congratulations, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Can you tell me who bought it? I'm afraid I can't give out personal information, she said, her tone turning professional. But it was a cash buyer. The transfer is finalized. Finalized, I echoed softly. So there's no way for me to visit before they move in? Well, technically the sale won't record with the county for another 2 days, so until then the keys haven't officially changed hands. 2 days. That was all I needed. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence for a moment. The rain had stopped outside, and sunlight was pushing through the clouds. It felt almost like a sign. Faint. I packed a small bag. Gloves, flashlight, Harold's letter, and the old cabin key I'd kept hidden in my jewelry box. The drive up the mountain took nearly 3 hours, winding through roads that hadn't changed a bit. Every turn brought back memories. Tessa chasing fireflies in the summer dusk, Harold teaching her how to skip stones, me sitting on the porch watching them laugh. By the time I reached the driveway, my eyes were stinging from more than just the glare of the morning light. The cabin stood exactly as I remembered it, weathered wood, green shutters, the faint smell of pine, a little worn but standing strong, like it had been waiting for me. I unlocked the door. The hinges groaned, just like they always did. Dust motes swirled through the air as sunlight streamed across the floor. Everything was still there. The old rocking chair, the quilt draped over the couch, the faded photograph of Harold and me on the mantel. For a second, I felt his presence so strongly I had to steady myself against the doorframe. I walked to the fireplace. My heart pounded as I knelt down and tapped the floorboards with my hand. One of them sounded hollow. I grabbed the pocket knife from my bag, Harold's knife, and pried it loose. Beneath it, wrapped in a layer of plastic, was a metal box. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. It was heavier than I expected. When I opened it, I nearly gasped. Inside were several sealed envelopes, each thick with documents, deeds, bonds, and a letter from a bank. My breath caught when I saw the number. Harold had left me more money than I could have dreamed. My knees gave out, and I sat there on the dusty floor, laughing through my tears. He'd thought of everything. Even gone, he was still taking care of me. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. Tessa might have sold the cabin on paper, but she hadn't taken its soul. And now, thanks to Harold, I had the means to make things right, not just to reclaim what was stolen, but to remind her who she was dealing with. As I stood, the wind outside picked up, carrying the scent of pine through the open door. For the first time since that awful phone call, I smiled. Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about dignity, about taking back what love had built and betrayal had tried to steal. And deep down, I could almost hear Harold whisper, proud and steady, "You've got this, Nell." By the time I drove back down from the mountain, I was facing a choice that would have made Harold proud, or maybe nervous. I could walk away quietly, let Tessa enjoy her trip, and live with her decision. Or I could take back what she'd stolen and show her that the woman she underestimated wasn't nearly as helpless as she believed. And Lord help me, I wasn't choosing silence. The drive home was long, and the air inside the car felt heavier than usual. Every bump in the road shook loose another memory. Tessa's laughter as a child, the way she used to braid wildflowers into my hair, Harold's voice telling me, "She's got your fire, Nell." Somewhere along the line, that fire must have burned her too hot, because now she didn't recognize it in me anymore. When I got home, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. Harold's letter, the bonds, the banknote, and the box they came in. My hands moved with a calm I didn't expect. The grief that had hollowed me out the day before had settled into something colder, sharper, focus. Harold had left me a small fortune, tucked away in an account that no one, not even Tessa, knew about. The letter from the bank said it had been accruing interest for over 15 years. I ran the numbers twice before I believed them. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. I felt steady. Still, a strange ache sat behind that steadiness, because no matter how angry I was, she was still my child. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in silence for a while, staring out the kitchen window. The morning light made the world look clean, like it didn't know anything about betrayal. That's when I heard the front door unlock. I froze. And then there she was, standing in the doorway with her suitcase, sunglasses still on, acting like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom," she said, setting her bag down. "I figured I'd crash here before my flight. My Uber was too expensive to the airport." I blinked. She hadn't even called ahead. "You're leaving already?" I asked, my voice steady. "Tomorrow morning," she said with a yawn. "I have to be in New York by noon for the layover. Anyway, what's for dinner?" "I'm starving." Her tone, casual, careless, made something twist deep inside me. "Tessa," I said slowly, "we need to talk." She groaned. "Oh no, Mom, please, don't start the guilt trip thing again. I don't want to argue." "This isn't an argument," I said quietly. "It's a conversation." She rolled her eyes but sat down across from me at the table. The box with Harold's papers was still there, though I'd covered it with a dish towel. "Fine," she muttered. "Say what you need to say." I looked at her, really looked. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the girl I raised. Her hair was pulled back too tight, her nails perfectly done, her phone face down on the table like a loaded weapon. "Why'd you do it?" I asked. "Why sell the cabin?" "Why my car? You didn't even ask me." Her jaw tightened. "Because you wouldn't have said yes. You never say yes to anything, Mom. You just hold on to stuff. Old things, old memories, old pain." That house was just sitting there like some shrine to Dad. It wasn't healthy. I felt my pulse pick up. "It wasn't a shrine," I said, keeping my tone calm. "It was a home. You can't just erase what you don't understand." She threw her hands up. "Oh, come on, it's just a place, Mom. You don't need it." I leaned forward. "Maybe not, but you don't get to decide that for me." For a moment, she looked caught off guard, like she'd never heard me raise my voice before. Then she laughed, but it wasn't the soft laugh I remembered. It was thin, nervous. "You're being dramatic again. Look, it's done. You'll be fine. I even transferred some money into your account." I stared at her. "Money from my own house." "Don't say it like that," she said quickly. "You weren't using it. I just made things practical." "You're retired, Mom. You should be relaxing, not worrying about property taxes." I sat back and let her words hang in the air. That word again. Practical. It had become her excuse for everything these last few years. Practical was why she never visited unless she needed something. Practical was why she forgot my birthday last year. "I was working late, Mom. It wasn't personal." And now practical was why she'd sold the last piece of my life with Harold. I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. I just looked at her, really studied her face. The same green eyes as her father's, but colder now. "Did you know," I said softly, "that your father left me a letter?" That made her pause. "A letter?" "Yes. He hid it in the cabin. I went up there yesterday." Her expression flickered. A flash of confusion, maybe even guilt. "You went up there? Mom, that's trespassing." "You don't own it anymore." I smiled faintly. "Not according to the county records. The sale won't finalize until tomorrow." She frowned. "So what, you went snooping around?" I ignored the jab. "Your father left me something," I said. "Something you didn't know existed. He made sure I'd be taken care of, even if someone tried to take everything else." Her mouth tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, standing, "that you may have sold the house on paper, but it's not gone, and neither am I." I could see the irritation in her face, but behind it, for just a second, there was a flicker of fear. She didn't like not being in control. She stood, too. "Mom, what are you planning?" I picked up my tea, calm as ever. "You'll see. But for now, you might want to make sure your trip insurance covers disappointment." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled, the kind of smile Harold used to give right before he won an argument. "It means your mother still knows how to handle her own affairs." She stared at me like she was trying to read something in my face, something she hadn't seen in years. Then she shook her head and muttered, "You're impossible," before storming off to her room. The moment she disappeared down the hallway, I finally let my shoulders drop. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from adrenaline. Harold used to say there's a quiet power in waiting for the right moment to strike. And as I sat there at that old kitchen table, I realized something. I didn't need to shout or threaten or make a scene. I just needed to do what I'd always done. Think, plan, and move when the timing was right. Tomorrow, the paperwork would be official. But tonight was my last window. And before that clock struck midnight, I was going to make sure my daughter learned that some women may look small, but they are made of mountains. It was almost midnight when I parked the truck halfway down the gravel road, engine off, lights dimmed. The air was sharp enough to sting, and the mountain loomed ahead like a dark, familiar giant waiting to see what kind of woman I really was. I'd left the house without waking Tessa. She'd fallen asleep early, phone still glowing beside her, half-packed suitcase tossed open on the floor. I didn't even say goodbye. I just slipped out the back door, grabbed Harold's old truck, and drove. The night hummed with crickets, the kind that always sang near the creek by our old cabin. I could almost hear Harold's laugh in the wind, that soft, teasing chuckle he used whenever I got myself into trouble. "Well, Harold," I whispered, stepping out into the cold, "looks like your Nell's not done fighting yet." The cabin's outline appeared between the trees, pale moonlight spilling across the roof. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at it. The home that had held our laughter, our arguments, our baby's first steps, and our last sunset together. It wasn't just timber and glass to me. It was years of everything that mattered. And tomorrow, by noon, it would belong to strangers. Not if I could help it. I walked around to the back, where Harold had built a narrow crawl space under the porch. Most people didn't even know it existed. That's where he'd hidden the lockbox years ago, the same one I'd found yesterday morning with his letter inside. But tonight, I wasn't here for letters or memories. I was here for proof. Inside that box were deeds, copies of insurance records, tax receipts, every document tied to the property. But more importantly, I'd found something else tucked behind a false panel. A notarized codicil to Harold's will, signed and dated 6 months before he died. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that the mountain cabin was to remain in the family trust indefinitely. It could never be sold without both of our written consent, and since Harold was gone, that meant mine alone. Tessa hadn't known that, and I had no intention of telling her, not until it was too late to fix her mistake. I knelt by the crawl space, brushed away some loose dirt, and slid out the fireproof envelope I'd hidden there earlier that day. Inside it were 2 things, the codicil and the bank's official verification that the trust was still active. I sealed the envelope again and tucked it under my jacket. I wasn't taking any chances. When I stood, I saw headlights flash in the distance, sudden, blinding, bouncing up the hill like a warning. My breath caught, the beam swayed closer, tires crunching over the gravel, and a small car came into view. Tessa's car. My first thought was disbelief. My second was pure fire. She'd followed me. I ducked behind the porch as her engine cut off. A door slammed, and her voice echoed into the quiet. Low, angry, sharp. "Mom, I know you're here!" I stayed silent, crouched low in the shadows. She must have woken, checked the garage, and realized I was gone. Typical Tessa, always trying to control what she couldn't understand. She stomped toward the front steps, muttering under her breath, "You can't just sneak off like some outlaw." God, Mom, this is ridiculous. When she reached the porch, her phone flashlight flicked on. Its narrow beam swept across the railing, then landed near my boots. "Nell Harper," she snapped, her voice slicing through the dark. "You better not be doing something stupid." I stepped out slowly, holding my head high. "Depends on what you call stupid, sweetheart." She jumped back a little, startled. "Jesus, Mom, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same." "You can't be here. The property's not yours anymore." "Not yet it isn't," I said calmly. "The sale hasn't cleared." She groaned. "For God's sake, what are you planning to do? Chain yourself to the porch? You're acting insane." I smiled faintly. "You think I don't know what I'm doing. But the truth is, you've never really known me, Tessa. You know the mother who baked cookies, not the woman who built this porch with her bare hands." She rolled her eyes. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." No, darling, I said softly. You already did that. The mountain wind whistled through the pines, tugging at her coat. I could see the frustration melting just a little. Underneath it, maybe, something else. Guilt. Then she crossed her arms. Fine. What's your endgame? You think you can undo a sale like this overnight? The papers are already filed. It's where you're wrong, I said, pulling the envelope from my jacket. You never checked the original trust. Your father made sure this land couldn't be sold without my approval. Her eyes widened. That's not possible. The lawyer. Didn't know, I interrupted, because you didn't bother to ask. You just went ahead and signed what you thought you could control. She shook her head. No, that can't be right. I took a slow step forward, holding her gaze. It is. I have every document to prove it. And come morning, I'll be at the county office making sure that sale gets nullified. She blinked, her face pale in the moonlight. You'd really do that to me? I almost laughed. To you? You did this to yourself. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the creak of the porch boards and the whisper of the forest around us. Finally, she whispered, I just wanted to help you, Mom. I thought maybe if I handled things, you'd finally rest. You've been stuck up here since Dad died. I felt something soften in my chest, but only for a moment. Helping someone doesn't mean erasing them, Tessa. Tears welled in her eyes, glinting like glass. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said quietly. But you did, and now you need to face it. She took a step toward me, hesitant. So what now? You'll take it to court? No, I said, shaking my head. I'll take it to the truth, and I'll let the truth do the talking. She stood there for a long while, staring down at the ground, her hands buried in her coat pockets. I could see her shoulders trembling, whether from the cold or from what she'd done, I couldn't tell. When she finally looked back up, her voice was small. Can I at least see the letter Dad left? I hesitated, then reached into my bag and handed it over. She took it with shaking fingers. As she read, I saw her face change, confusion, then realization, then something that looked a whole lot like shame. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully, almost reverently, and handed it back. He really loved you, she whispered. Yes, I said, my throat tight. He did. And he trusted me to protect what we built, even from our own child, if it came to that. She looked away. I guess you did. I nodded. You should go home, Tessa. Get some rest. You'll need it when the lawyers call. She didn't argue this time. She just walked back to her car, her steps heavy, her silhouette fading in the mist. When the taillights disappeared down the hill, I finally let myself breathe again. I turned toward the cabin, the old wooden door glowing faintly in the moonlight. My hand rested on the latch, and for the first time in days I felt something close to peace. The mountain had always been my sanctuary, and tonight it felt like it was standing guard over me again. Good night, Harold, I whispered. Your Nell did right. And then I locked the door behind me. Sometimes life gives you a warning before it hits you with a lesson. You just don't recognize it until it's too late. Looking back, I realized the warning had been there for weeks. In the way Tessa avoided my calls, in the polite but hurried tone of her texts, and in the faint scent of distance whenever we spoke. I'd brushed it off as stress, but deep down, my heart already knew something was coming. That night, after she drove off from the cabin, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch swing with Harold's old flannel wrapped around my shoulders and watched the stars fade into dawn. The air was cold, but not cruel, the kind of stillness that made you feel both small and held at the same time. By morning, I had a plan. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, packed a small bag, and loaded the envelope of documents into the truck. It was time to go into town, to the county office, and make things official. But before I left, I took one last walk around the cabin. The wildflowers Harold had planted years ago were still there, sprouting through the frost, stubborn and bright. The front door creaked when I closed it, like it was sighing. I pressed my hand against the wood, whispering, "You're safe now." The drive down the mountain was slow and winding. Every turn brought back memories. Tessa sitting in the passenger seat with her knees pulled up, chattering about school plays and homecoming dances. She'd been such a sweet girl once. I wondered how that little girl turned into the woman who could sell her mother's home like it was nothing more than property on paper. The county office sat at the edge of town, an old brick building with fading blue trim. Inside, it smelled of coffee, paper, and quiet tension. A young clerk behind the counter smiled politely when I approached. "Morning, ma'am." "What can I help you with?" "I need to file a motion to freeze a property sale," I said, setting the envelope on the counter. The sale was made without full authorization. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You have documentation for that?" I nodded. "Every last piece." He motioned for me to follow him to a desk in the back. We went through the papers together. The codicil, the trust documents, the tax receipts. His professional politeness slowly shifted to respect. "This is solid," he said finally. "You'll need to meet with the county registrar to make it official, but based on this, the sale can be paused until the ownership question is reviewed." "Paused?" I asked. "Not cancelled." "Not yet," he said gently. "But this will buy you time." Time. That word felt like gold. When I walked out of that office, the sun had fully risen, warm and golden on my face. I could feel Harold walking with me in spirit, whispering the same thing he used to whenever I solved something he couldn't. That's my Nell. But peace never lasts long in my life. By the time I got home that afternoon, there were 2 missed calls from Tessa and a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. When I played it, a man's voice filled the room. Deep, confident, rehearsed. "Mrs. Harper, this is Nathan Cole, representing your daughter, Miss Tessa James. We've been informed you're attempting to interfere with a lawful real estate transaction. We urge you to cease and desist immediately before we proceed with legal action. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Legal action." My heart didn't even skip, it just sank. For a moment I sat perfectly still, the phone still warm in my hand. Then, slowly, I started to laugh. The kind of soft, bitter laugh that comes when someone pushes you too far. "Oh, Tessa," I murmured, shaking my head, "you really don't know your mother." I called my attorney, an old friend named Judy Barnes, who'd handled Harold's estate after his passing. Judy was the kind of woman who could dismantle a man's ego with a single sentence and still smile politely while doing it. "Judy," I said, trying to sound calm. "I think I'm about to have some fun." "Fun?" she echoed, amused. "That's not usually what people say when they're being threatened with a lawsuit." I explained everything. The sale, the trust, the late-night visit to the cabin, even the voicemail. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Judy sighed. "She's got herself tangled in something she doesn't understand. But don't worry, Nell, you've got the stronger hand. That codicil changes everything." "So I'm not crazy?" I asked. "You're not crazy," she said firmly. "You're just dealing with a child who still thinks she's the adult in the room. Send me the documents. I'll file an injunction first thing in the morning." For the first time in days, I let myself smile. "Thank you, Judy." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Tessa might double down before she backs off. You know how pride works." I did know. Pride was a poison that looked a lot like self-confidence until it burned everything down. That night, as I sat by the kitchen window, I couldn't shake the image of Tessa's face from the night before. Pale, frightened, but still defiant. She'd inherited her father's stubbornness, but none of his tenderness. Maybe she thought this was strength. Maybe she thought hurting me was the only way to stand on her own. I wanted to hate her. God knows she'd earned it. But love, especially a mother's love, is a complicated thing. You can be furious and heartbroken at the same time. You can see the child inside the woman who betrayed you and still ache to protect her. Still, that didn't mean I'd let her walk all over me again. Before bed, I took out Harold's letter one more time. His handwriting was uneven, shaky near the end, but every word carried the weight of truth. "If you're reading this, my love, it means I'm gone, and I trust you to protect what we built. Don't let anyone, not even our own, sell the mountain short. It's more than a house, Nell. It's our story. And stories deserve to be kept alive. I pressed the page to my chest and whispered, I won't let you down. The phone buzzed on the counter again. Another text from Tessa. Mom, please, stop before this gets worse. You're going to embarrass yourself. Embarrass myself. That line sat heavy in my chest. All these years, I'd given her everything. My time, my savings, my love. And now she was worried about embarrassment. I typed back slowly, I'm not the one who should be ashamed. Then I set the phone down, turned off the lights, and let the quiet fill the house. Out the window, the mountain glowed under the moonlight, strong and unshaken. It reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. That dignity isn't loud. It's not about fighting for attention or winning arguments. It's about standing firm when the world thinks you'll fall. And I intended to keep standing. Tomorrow, I'd meet Judy at her office. Tomorrow, the truth would start working in my favor. But that night, sitting in the soft hum of silence, I could feel something changing. Not just the situation, me. The fear that had been clinging to me for days was gone. In its place was resolve. Calm, steady, certain. I didn't know how this story would end yet, but one thing was clear. Tessa might have sold my house, but she'd just awakened the part of me that didn't break anymore. And that part? That's the one Harold always said could move mountains. The morning air smelled like rain and redemption, the kind of heavy, silver sky that promised a storm but hadn't decided when to start. I drove down to town with the windows cracked open, letting that cool mountain air whip through the truck and clear my thoughts. The steering wheel was cold beneath my palms, the same wheel Harold had gripped all those years we came down this same winding road. Only now, it was just me, driving into a fight I hadn't asked for, but sure as hell wouldn't back away from. The town was just waking up. Storefronts were lighting up, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the diner by Main Street. That scent brought a flash of memory. Harold leaning over the counter, flirting with the waitress, making me laugh with his ridiculous cowboy grin. Lord, he could charm anyone. For a second, I could almost hear his voice saying, "Go easy, Nell. You catch more flies with honey." But not today. Today wasn't about honey. It was about taking back what was mine. I parked outside Judy Barnes's law office, a neat little brick building squeezed between the hardware store and the florist. When I walked in, the chime over the door tinkled softly, and there she was. Judy, in her crisp blazer, glasses perched halfway down her nose, already holding a stack of papers like she'd been waiting for me since dawn. "Morning, Nell," she said, standing up. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," I replied, setting my purse down. "Didn't have time for dreaming, too busy remembering." Judy gave me that knowing look, the one that said she'd heard 1,000 stories like mine but still cared about each one. "You ready to play hardball?" "Born ready," I said, trying to sound stronger than I felt. We sat across from each other at her mahogany desk as she walked me through everything. The injunction filing, the hearing date, the documentation I'd need to bring. Every sentence was precise, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed this kind of fight too many times. Finally, she leaned back and said, "Once this goes through, the sale's frozen. Legally, the buyers can't touch it. But I'll warn you, they're not going to take it kindly." "I don't expect them to," I said. "Neither will Tessa." She sighed. "You still hoping she'll apologize?" I stared at my hands. "Hope's not the word. I just want her to see what she's done, to understand it." "Understanding doesn't always come with age," Judy said quietly. "Sometimes it comes with loss." I nodded. That truth stung more than I cared to admit. When the paperwork was done, I signed the last page with a steady hand. Judy gave me a copy and said she'd call me once the county confirmed receipt. I thanked her, then stepped back outside into the grey light. Rain had started to fall, slow, deliberate drops that tapped against the hood of my jacket. I stood there for a moment, letting it soak into my hair. It felt cleansing somehow, like the mountain itself was washing away my fear. As I got into the truck, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Tessa. You really went to a lawyer? Unbelievable. You're making me look like a fool, Mom. I didn't reply. Instead, I started the engine, turned on the wipers, and whispered to the rain, maybe you needed to look like one to realize what you've done. Driving home, I passed by the diner again. The waitress, June, waved at me through the window. I stopped, rolled it down, and she leaned out. Well, if it isn't Miss Nell Harper, haven't seen you down here in ages. Everything all right, sugar? I forced a smile. Getting there, June, just working through some family business. She laughed, shaking her head. Aren't we all? You tell that daughter of yours I said hi. I saw her here last week, thought she looked in a hurry. I blinked. Tessa, she was here? Sure was, June said cheerfully. Came in with some fella. Tall, wore a fancy watch. They were talking about Europe, I think. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Europe? Mm-hmm. She mentioned buying property overseas or something. Sounded mighty excited about it. I smiled faintly, but inside I felt something twist. She'd already moved on, already spent the money in her head before it even existed. Thanks, June, I said softly. Take care now. When I pulled back onto the road, I couldn't stop thinking about that watch. Tessa never liked men who flaunted money, but maybe desperation makes you blind, or maybe greed does. Either way, I could see the pieces falling into place. Her sudden coldness, the rush to sell, the secrecy, someone had gotten in her ear, and I was about to find out who. Back at the cabin, I made myself some tea and sat by the fire. The rain beat against the windows, soft but relentless. I thought about the man June had mentioned, and I couldn't shake the image of Tessa laughing with someone she barely knew, maybe believing this was her ticket to freedom. Harold used to say, money'll show a person's heart faster than love ever could. I never fully believed him until now. That afternoon, Judy called. Nell, the injunction's been filed. You're officially protected. They can't touch the cabin until a judge reviews it. Relief washed over me like warm water. Thank you, Judy. One more thing, she added. Tessa's lawyer called me. He said his client believes you're emotionally unfit to handle property matters, something about declining mental health. I froze. She said what? She's claiming you're not of sound mind, trying to undermine your authority. The words hit like ice. My own daughter? Questioning my sanity to steal what her father and I built. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then let's give them a show, Judy. I'll be the sanest woman they've ever met. When we hung up, I sat back, staring at the fire until my reflection blurred in the glass. Anger was there, sure, but underneath it, something deeper, resolve. If Tessa wanted to paint me as unstable, I'd let her talk, let her spin her little web of excuses. Because when that judge read Harold's codicil, when the truth came out, she'd have nowhere left to hide. I reached for my journal, the one Harold had given me on our 25th anniversary, and began to write. I wrote everything, the phone call, the night visit, the lies, the storm. It wasn't just a record, it was protection. By the time I finished, the rain had stopped, and a golden ribbon of sunlight slipped through the clouds, touching the edge of the porch. I stood, stretched, and looked out at the mountain. It gleamed like it had been washed clean. Maybe that's what storms do. They wreck what's weak so the strong parts can stand taller. I ran my fingers along the doorframe, whispered, "We're not done yet, Harold." Somewhere inside me I felt his answer. No, Nell, not by a long shot. And for the first time since that awful phone call, I smiled. Not out of bitterness, but strength. Because now it wasn't just about saving a house. It was about saving my name, my dignity, and the truth of who I really was. A woman who had weathered loss, love, and betrayal and still stood firm when everything tried to shake her. Let them come. The mountain was mine. And I was hers. There's a moment in every storm when the thunder quiets, just enough for you to think it's over. That's the cruel trick of calm. It makes you lower your guard right before the next strike. That's exactly where I was the next morning, caught between relief and reality, thinking maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. I'd spent the night at the cabin, wrapped in Harold's old quilt, with the fire burning low. The air smelled like cedar and ash. Home! When I woke up, sunlight had crept through the curtains in thin golden lines, softening the room that had seen too many tears this past week. I made myself oatmeal, poured a mug of black coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the letter from Harold beside me. I'd started keeping it there, like a silent witness, reminding me I wasn't alone in this fight. The phone rang just as I took the first sip. I expected Judy. Instead, it was Tessa. Her voice was flat, cold. "Mom, we need to talk." I didn't flinch. "Go ahead." "I met with my lawyer this morning," she said. "He told me what you did. You can't block this sale, Mom. The buyer's already wired the deposit." "Then they'll have to wait for their refund," I said evenly, "because that cabin's not for sale." There was a pause. "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I'm protecting what your father and I built, the place you were born, the home where we buried his ashes." "That's manipulation," she snapped. "You're using Dad's memory to guilt me." I laughed softly, not from humor but from disbelief. "Honey, if guilt is what you're feeling, maybe it's not me doing the manipulating." She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her tone shifted, sharp, desperate. "You're ruining my life, Mom. I needed that money. You think I'm selfish, but you don't know everything." My grip tightened on the phone. "Then tell me." "Tell me why selling my home, your father's home, was worth breaking your mother's heart." She sighed, and for the first time I heard something fragile in her voice. "I was trying to fix things, okay? I got into debt. Real debt, not the kind you just work off. I thought if I sold the cabin and the car, I could wipe it all clean. Start over." "What kind of debt?" I asked. There was silence. Then, finally, a man I shouldn't have trusted. He convinced me to invest in something, said it was foolproof. Turns out I was the fool. The world seemed to tilt. "Was that the same man June saw you with?" Tessa gasped. "You've been asking around." "I didn't have to. Folks talk." Her breath hitched. "You always do this. Prime medal judge. You don't trust me." "Trust is earned, not demanded." Her tone hardened again. "Fine, you want to play this game? Then you better be ready, because if you keep pushing, I'll file for power of attorney. I'll tell the court you're not fit to handle your affairs." That did it. That cut deeper than any betrayal could have. "You'd do that to me?" I whispered. "You've left me no choice." "Sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling but steady, "you've always had a choice. You just keep choosing wrong." She hung up. I sat there for a long while, the silence heavier than any words could be. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Tired, yes, but not broken. And somewhere inside, something clicked. I wasn't the helpless mother she imagined. I was still the woman who built her own home from nothing, who raised a child alone when the world said she couldn't. If Tessa wanted to fight, she was about to meet the version of me that didn't flinch. By noon, I was back at Judy's office, phone calls still echoing in my ears. She looked up when I walked in and immediately frowned. "Oh no, what happened? She's threatening to file for guardianship," I said, dropping my purse on the desk. "Claims I'm not mentally stable." Judy sighed. "That's a low blow, but it's an old trick. Don't let it rattle you." "Rattle me?" I chuckled. "I'm way past rattled." Judy smiled faintly. "Then let's stay 2 steps ahead. I'll arrange for a formal competency evaluation. Voluntary. It'll prove she's got no grounds to stand on. And once we file that report, we'll be untouchable." "Make it happen," I said. As we finalized the paperwork, I noticed Judy's expression soften. "You know," she said gently, "I've seen families tear each other apart over less. But this is about more than property, isn't it?" I hesitated, then nodded. "It's about respect." "About not being erased." She gave a small nod, understanding more than I said aloud. "Then let's make sure your story gets heard." That evening, I drove back up the mountain, feeling lighter somehow, like the wind itself was on my side. The sky had cleared, and the trees shimmered with raindrops that caught the last of the sun. When I got to the cabin, a car I didn't recognize was parked out front. I froze. The engine was off, but the hood was still warm. I glanced around, heart pounding. Then I saw it, a note taped to the door. My name was written in hurried letters. I peeled it off and read, "You don't know what you're getting into, Mrs. Harper. Stay out of this before you get hurt." No handwriting I recognized, just those words, cold, deliberate, and wrong. I stepped back, scanning the trees. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, a twig snapped. My breath caught. "Who's there?" I called out. Silence. I stood there another moment, every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. Then I went inside, locked the door, and drew the curtains tight. Whoever left that note. It wasn't Tessa. She wouldn't threaten me like that. Not yet, anyway. No, this was someone else. Someone with a reason to want me scared enough to back off. The man with the watch. I set the note on the table beside Harold's letter. One was love. The other was warning. I stared at them both and whispered, "Looks like we're not fighting just family anymore, Harold." That night, I didn't light the fire. I didn't need the warmth, not with adrenaline burning through my veins. I sat by the window with a flashlight, watching the shadows stretch and breathe outside. It was the first time in years I'd felt true fear, but underneath it there was something else too, something sharper, stronger. Determination. They could try to scare me, they could call me crazy, they could take me to court. But they'd forgotten one important thing. I was a mother, and mothers don't surrender. We endure, we adapt, we fight smarter. As the clock struck midnight, thunder rumbled in the distance, low, steady, and far away. Maybe it was just weather. Maybe it was something else. Either way, I whispered into the dark, "Let it come." Because I wasn't running anymore, the sound of shattering glass yanked me out of bed before my mind could catch up. For a moment, I just stood there, heart hammering, breath trapped somewhere in my chest, listening to the pieces roll across the wooden floor. Then came the cold rush of realization. Someone had thrown a rock through my front window. I grabbed the flashlight and crept into the living room, my slippers sliding over the scattered shards. A chill wind pushed through the broken pane, carrying in the smell of rain and pine. On the floor lay a rock wrapped in paper. My hands shook as I bent down and unwrapped it. 2 words, scrawled in black marker, "Final warning." That was when the fear turned into anger, slow, steady, and burning deep. I wasn't a woman who scared easy, not when I'd buried a husband, raised a child alone, and held my ground through loss after loss. But this was different. Someone had crossed a line. I set the note on the counter and picked up the phone. Judy answered on the second ring. "Don't tell me," she sighed. "Something else happened." "Rock through my window," I said. "Left me a message, short and sweet." There was a pause on the other end. Then her voice turned sharp. "You need to get out of there, Nell. Tonight. Come stay with me." "No." I looked around the cabin, at the cracked glass glittering like frost on the floor. "I'm not leaving. If they want me gone, they'll have to do better than a scare tactic." Judy exhaled. "You're too stubborn for your own good." "Maybe, but I've lived through worse." We talked a while longer about the police report she'd file in the morning, the security camera she'd send someone to install. I agreed to it all, though part of me knew it wouldn't change much. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to frighten me, they were trying to push me out before something came to light. And I had a feeling I knew what that something was. When the call ended, I cleaned up the glass and sat down with my journal. Writing helped me steady my thoughts. Harold used to tease me about it, said I treated my notebook like a second heart, pouring everything in so nothing got lost. That night, I wrote about the note, about the threat, about the hollow ache of realizing my daughter might be tangled in something darker than she understood. I ended the entry with one line: "They don't know who they're dealing with." I slept in Harold's armchair, the old rifle propped beside me. Morning came grey and heavy with fog. A soft drizzle pattered against the roof, the kind that made the mountains look like they were exhaling. I brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching the mist drift between the trees. That's when a car pulled up the drive. I tensed, but when I saw the sheriff's decal on the side, I exhaled. Deputy Ray stepped out, hat in hand. He was one of the good ones, a kind man with silver at his temples and the patience of a saint. "Mornin', Miss Nell," he said, voice low. "Judy called me, said you had some trouble." He studied everything carefully, snapping photos, jotting things down. "Any idea who might have done it?" he asked. "Someone who wants me quiet," I said, "and someone who knows this road." He frowned. "You think this has to do with your daughter's sale?" "I think it's got everything to do with it. There's been talk in town about a man nosing around, asking questions about the old Harper property, said he's a buyer, but nobody's seen any paperwork." My stomach turned. Tall? Mid-40s? Expensive watch? Ray's eyes narrowed. "That's the one." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "He's not a buyer. He's the one behind Tessa's so-called investment." Ray wrote something down, then met my eyes. "You be careful, Miss Nell. Men like that don't play fair. I'll keep an extra car near the ridge tonight." I thanked him, and after he left, I sat at the kitchen table again. Same spot, same sunlight cutting across Harold's letter. I traced the handwriting with my fingers and whispered, "You were right, love. She's in over her head." Later that afternoon, I called Tessa again. She didn't pick up. So I left a message. Calm, steady, deliberate. "Tessa, it's your mother. We need to talk. This isn't about money anymore. It's about your safety. Whoever that man is, he's not who you think. Please call me back." I hung up, half expecting silence. But 15 minutes later, the phone rang. "Mom?" Her voice was small, almost like the little girl who used to hide behind my apron when thunder hit. "Baby," I said softly, "where are you?" "In town," she whispered, "at the motel near the highway. I didn't know where else to go. You stay right there. I'm coming to you." When I got there, she was sitting outside her room, wrapped in a denim jacket, eyes red and swollen. She looked more like a frightened child than a grown woman who'd just tried to sell her mother's home. "Oh, honey," I murmured, pulling her into my arms. She broke down, sobbing against my shoulder. "I didn't know he was dangerous, Mom. I swear I didn't. He told me it was just business. But last night he called, said if I didn't get him the money by Friday, he'd come after me." My heart clenched. "And you thought selling my house would fix that?" She nodded, trembling. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. I cupped her face in my hands. "You listen to me, Tessa. We're going to fix this, together. But you have to trust me now. No more lies." She nodded weakly. "Okay." For the first time in weeks, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Remorse, maybe even hope. We packed her few things, checked her out, and drove back up the mountain. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, jumping at every car that passed. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens," I told her, "you're not alone in this." When we got to the cabin, she froze at the sight of the broken window. "Oh my God, he was here, wasn't he?" "Looks like it," I said. "But he left a message, and so will we." That night, I taped a new note to the same window, bold and simple, written in black marker just like his. "Try M.E." Tessa stared at it, half terrified, half in awe. "Mom, you're crazy." "Maybe," I said, meeting her eyes, "but I'm not scared. We slept little that night." Every sound outside made us flinch. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper against the glass. But underneath the fear, something stronger pulsed between us. The fragile thread of reconciliation. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I caught her hand in mine and said softly, "You were your father's pride, you know that. He'd forgive you in a heartbeat." She smiled through tears. "Would you?" I hesitated, then brushed her hair from her face. "I already have." Outside, thunder rolled again, a storm brewing over the ridge. But this time, I wasn't waiting for it to pass. This time, I was ready to stand in it. I should have known that storm wasn't just weather. Out here, the mountains always have a way of warning you before something big comes crashing down. A silence that lingers too long, the way the trees go still like they're listening. That night, I felt it in my bones, the kind of heaviness that tells you life's about to split in two, before and after. The morning after the storm, the sky looked bruised, all purples and greys rolling together. Tessa was curled up on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her face pale and swollen from crying. I brewed a pot of coffee, that strong, dark roast Harold used to love, and let the smell fill the room. The quiet between us was almost sacred, or maybe just fragile. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper. "Do you think he'll come here?" I stirred sugar into my cup, watching the little whirlpool disappear. If he's desperate enough, yes. Her lips trembled. "Then what are we going to do?" "We're going to handle it," I said calmly, "the same way I handled everything else life ever threw at me." She looked up, eyes wide. "How?" I set the cup down, leaned back, and gave her a long, steady look. "By being smarter than him, and by remembering this house. Our house was built on grit, not fear. I think that's when something shifted in her. For the first time since all this started, she wasn't just scared, she was angry. The good kind of angry, the kind that comes from realizing you've been played." She took a deep breath. "Tell me what to do." "First," I said, "you tell me everything." "From the start." And she did. Turns out the man's name was Mark Hastings. Slick-talking investor who claimed to be flipping old mountain properties into eco-resorts. He'd met her through a co-worker, wined her, dined her, and convinced her that partnering with him could double her money in months. When she hesitated, he started talking about how much Harold's land was worth, how it was, just sitting there collecting dust. "He said you didn't need it," she murmured, "said it was wasted potential." I clenched my jaw. "And you believed him?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I wanted to. I thought if I made some money, I could finally pay off my debts, maybe even help you out." I sighed, the kind of sigh that feels like years leaving your chest. "That's what they do, baby. They make you think it's about helping someone. But it's always about control." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Then I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the start. "Did you sign anything?" Her eyes flickered away. I did. Some papers he said were preliminary. He told me not to worry." My stomach dropped. "Do you still have copies?" "In my email." I grabbed my laptop and motioned for her to sit beside me. "Show me." We pulled up her inbox. Sure enough, there were scanned contracts, full of legal jargon, but one thing jumped out at me right away, Harold's name. The deed transfer authorization. He'd forged my late husband's signature. The audacity of that man. I stared at the screen, rage and disbelief coursing through me in equal measure. Harold had been gone for years, yet somehow this stranger had reached right through time to steal his name, his memory, his legacy. Tessa had covered her mouth. "Oh my God, Mom, what do we do?" I took a deep breath, forcing calm into my voice. "We fight fire with truth. I'm calling my lawyer." That old rotary phone looked almost symbolic now, sitting there like a weapon from another era. I dialed Mr. Keller, Harold's attorney back in town. He answered with that slow drawl of his, polite but always alert. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." So I told him everything. About the forged signature, the threat, the fake sale, the rock through my window. He listened quietly, the kind of quiet that tells you wheels are turning. Finally, he said, "Bring those documents down to my office this afternoon, and Mrs. Harper, don't go alone." I hung up and looked at Tessa. "You're coming with me." The drive down the mountain felt endless. The rain had eased, but the roads were slick, and fog hugged the curves like old secrets. Neither of us spoke much, just the hum of the engine and the rhythm of windshield wipers marking time. When we pulled up outside Keller's office, Tessa hesitated. "Mom, what if he's there?" "Then he's about to have the worst day of his life," I said simply. Inside, Keller greeted us with a grave expression. He looked over the papers, adjusted his glasses, and whistled low. "This is bad. But it's also stupid. He left a trail, Phone numbers, email signatures, fake witnesses. I can get a court order by tomorrow morning. Tessa's shoulders sagged with relief. So we can stop him? He nodded. We can freeze the transaction and alert the sheriff. But Mrs. Harper, you might want to prepare yourself. Men like this don't walk away quietly. I don't expect him to, I said. We left the office just as the sun started breaking through the clouds, painting the wet streets gold. I should have felt relief, but something told me it wasn't over. Back at the cabin, I found the front door ajar. Every instinct in me went cold. I motioned for Tessa to stay behind me, picked up the heavy flashlight by the porch, and stepped inside. The air was different, charged, unsettled. My papers were scattered across the floor, drawers half open, couch cushions tossed aside. "He's been here," I whispered. Tessa clutched my arm. "Mom, we should leave." But I wasn't moving, not yet, not until I knew what he'd been looking for. That's when I saw it. The loose floorboard by the fireplace. The same one Harold had pried up years ago when he'd hidden that old lockbox beneath it. I knelt down, pried it open, and there it was, the metal box, right where he'd left it. Inside were envelopes, keys, and a sealed letter addressed to me. Harold's handwriting, steady as always. Tessa stared. "What is that?" I ran my thumb across the faded ink. "A goodbye, maybe, or a clue." She watched as I unfolded the letter and began to read. Harold's words flowed like a whisper through time. "If you're reading this, Nell, it means the house has found trouble again. Don't be afraid. I left something behind, something that belongs to you. The safe deposit key is in this box. You'll know what to do when you see it. Trust your gut, sweetheart. It's never steered you wrong." My eyes blurred. That man, even gone, he was still protecting me. I reached into the box and pulled out a small brass key tied with a red string. The engraving read, "Bank of Meadow Ridge, Box 214. I turned to Tessa. "He left us more than memories, baby. He left us the way out." She wiped her tears. "What do you think's inside?" I smiled faintly. "If I know your father, it's not money. It's something stronger. The truth." Outside, thunder rumbled again in the distance, faint but deliberate. I could almost hear Harold's voice in it, calm and steady as ever. "Looks like the storm's not done with us yet," I murmured. But this time, I wasn't the one who looked scared. Tessa straightened her shoulders, jaw set firm. "Then let's finish it." And in that moment, standing there in our wrecked little cabin, I saw a spark in her that I hadn't seen in years. The fire of a woman finally learning what strength really means. Whatever that man had started, we were about to end it. Together. By the next morning, that brass key felt heavier than gold in my pocket. I couldn't sleep thinking about what Harold might have left behind and why he'd hidden it so carefully. Maybe it was money, maybe it was a will, or maybe it was something far more dangerous. When I stepped out onto the porch, the air was crisp, almost too still. Even the birds seemed to know something was brewing. Tessa came out behind me, clutching a mug of coffee in both hands, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She looked tired, but for the first time in weeks, she also looked present. "You think the bank's open this early?" she asked, forcing a small smile. "They'll open for me," I said, slipping on my jacket. "They always did for your father." We packed up the documents, locked up the cabin, and started the long drive down the mountain. The road wound through a forest of tall pines, sunlight streaming through like liquid gold. For a brief moment, it almost felt peaceful. But every time a car appeared behind us, Tessa would glance at the mirror, fingers tightening around her cup. "You think he's still watching us?" she whispered. "I think men like him don't quit easy," I said. "But that's all right. Neither do I." When we pulled into town, the little bank looked just like it had 20 years ago. The same squeaky glass doors, the same blue paint peeling on the window frames. The teller, an older woman named Patty, smiled when she saw me. "Well, if it isn't Miss Nell Harper, haven't seen you since Harold passed. What brings you in?" I leaned on the counter. "A little unfinished business?" I showed her the brass key, and her eyes widened slightly. "Oh my, that's one of the old vault boxes. Haven't seen one of those in years." She led us to a small room in the back, where a heavy steel door stood like a relic from another time. Inside, the air smelled faintly of metal and paper, old secrets and older memories. Patty inserted her master key, I used mine, and together the lock clicked open with a deep, echoing sound. Inside box 214 was a thick brown envelope tied with twine. My name was written across it in Harold's unmistakable hand. Beneath it lay another envelope. This one unmarked, sealed with a red wax stamp. Tessa's breath caught. "What's that one? Let's find out." I opened the unmarked one first. Inside were photographs, grainy black and white images of men in suits standing near a construction site. I flicked through them, my heart pounding faster with each one. Harold was in a few of them, standing beside a sign that read Meadow Ridge Estates Development, 1992. And there in the corner of one photo was a familiar face, Mark Hastings. Only back then, he wasn't Mark Hastings. The caption scribbled in Harold's handwriting read, Martin Hale, foreman, fired for theft, 1993. "Oh my God," Tessa whispered, "it's the same man." I nodded slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears. "He's been circling this property for 30 years. We moved on to the second envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten letter from Harold, dated just a year before he died. "Nell, if you ever find yourself in trouble over this land, know that it's not just dirt and trees they're after. There's something buried beneath, something that man tried to steal once before." I stopped him then, but he'll try again. "Keep this evidence safe. It's your shield. And if Tessa's with you, tell her the truth. Her father wasn't perfect, but he never stopped fighting for what was his." I sat back, staring at the words until they blurred. Tessa covered her mouth. "Mom, he knew. All this time. He left this for us, so we'd be ready. We spent the next half hour making copies, documenting everything." Patty looked uneasy but didn't ask questions. When we walked out of the bank, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that Harold's voice had found its way back to us. Dread, because now I knew the full scope of what we were up against. As we reached the car, Tessa's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She froze. "It's him. Answer it." She hesitated, then put it on speaker. "Well," came that smooth, mocking voice, "the mountain girls finally came to town." My blood ran cold. "You've got a lot of nerve calling my daughter," I said sharply. He laughed, low and cruel. "Ah, Mrs. Harper, you've been busy. But see, that land isn't yours anymore. Paperwork's in motion. My lawyer's faster than yours." I clenched my jaw. "You forged a dead man's signature. You think that's going to hold up? I think by the time the law catches up, I'll already be gone, with my profit." "Not if I catch you first." He chuckled again, then his tone turned icy. "Be careful, Nell. People who dig too deep in those mountains tend to disappear." Then the line went dead. Tessa was shaking. "Mom, he knows. I want him to," I said. "Let him watch. He's about to see what happens when you corner a Harper." We didn't drive straight back home. I knew better than to lead him there. Instead, I turned off the main road and followed a narrow dirt trail Harold used to take when we wanted to watch sunsets from the ridge. Once we were hidden by the trees, I pulled over. "What are we doing?" Tessa asked. "We're buying time." I opened Harold's envelope again and found one last folded piece of paper tucked inside. It was a map. Hand-drawn, yellowed around the edges. A small red X marked a spot near the base of the ridge where our property line met the old quarry. "Harold left us something down there," I said, "and if I'm right, it's the proof that'll ruin that man." Tessa looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to be scared or proud. "You're really going to go look, aren't you?" I smiled faintly. "You bet your life I am." By the time we reached the ridge, the sun was dipping behind the mountains. The air smelled like wet leaves and iron. We found the spot marked on the map, a patch of overgrown grass near an old oak tree. I knelt down, brushing dirt away with my hands until I hit something solid. Metal, cold and ancient. A small, rusted box. We pried it open with a rock. Inside were yellowed papers, deeds, photos, and one cassette tape labelled Meadow Ridge Deal, 1992. Tessa's eyes widened. "Is that?" "Evidence," I said, "enough to destroy him." But before I could say another word, headlights swept across the trees. Tessa grabbed my arm. "Mom!" I looked up, and there he was. Mark Hastings, stepping out of a black SUV, raincoat slick with mist, that smug grin plastered on his face. "Well," he said, clapping slowly, "didn't think you'd actually find it." I stood, box in hand. "You really should have stayed gone, Martin." His smile faltered just slightly. "You shouldn't have brought her into this." "Oh, she's already in it," I said, stepping closer. "And this time, you're not walking away." He reached into his coat, and for a second I didn't breathe. But before I could react, the sound of sirens echoed through the valley. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. Sheriff Ray's truck roared up the trail, gravel spraying. "Step back!" he shouted, gun drawn. "Hands where I can see 'em!" "Who called the cops?" I held up Harold's evidence box. "No, he did, 30 years ago. You just didn't know it." Ray cuffed him right there in the mud while Tessa and I stood silent, the storm wind whipping around us. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension drain from my body, replaced by something fierce and clean, justice. As they drove him away, Tessa turned to me, tears in her eyes. "Mom, we did it." I nodded slowly. "No, baby, he did it. Your daddy made sure we'd never lose this home." The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of rain and pine. And for just a second, I could have sworn I heard Harold's laughter echoing through the trees, warm, proud, and free. I didn't know it then, but what happened that night on the ridge wasn't the end of my fight. It was just the beginning of what it cost to keep what was mine. The morning after they took Mark Hastings away, I woke up to a stillness I hadn't felt in months. The mountain felt different, lighter somehow, but not peaceful. More like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. Tessa was still asleep on the couch when I came downstairs. Her phone kept buzzing from news alerts, articles calling it the Harper Land fraud case. Reporters had gotten hold of the story fast. I could see her name mentioned in one of the headlines. She was the one who'd filmed everything on her phone when the sheriff arrested him. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The fog was thick and rolling slow, like it didn't want to leave. My hand brushed against the porch rail, worn smooth by years of use. I could almost see Harold sitting there, coffee in hand, looking proud that his family had stood their ground. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. A man like Hastings didn't work alone. There were bigger hands behind him, the kind that didn't like losing money. By noon, the phone rang. Sheriff Ray's voice came through, steady but tired. "Nell, we've got Mark in custody, but he's not talking. His lawyer's trying to spin it like a misunderstanding." "But the state's interested. You'll likely be called in for questioning soon." "I'll be there," I said. He hesitated. "There's something else. Keeps asking who tipped us off. Wasn't it your patrol?" "That's the thing," Ray said quietly. "We didn't get the call from you. We got it from an untraceable number. Came in right before we reached the ridge." A chill slid down my spine. Someone had known what was happening and wanted Mark caught. But who? When I hung up, I noticed Tessa standing in the doorway listening. "Mum, did you tell anyone where we were going?" I shook my head. "Not a soul." We exchanged a look, both realizing we weren't the only ones Harold had left instructions for. That evening, the clouds broke and the sky burned orange over the mountains. Tessa sat on the porch steps, scrolling through her phone, while I sorted through the old evidence box again. Inside, beneath the papers, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a folded photograph tucked into the lining. It was a picture of Harold and another man, standing shoulder to shoulder. The other man was young, maybe in his 30s, wearing a deputy's badge. On the back, in Harold's handwriting, it read, "Ray Carter, 1993, a good man to trust." Sheriff Ray had known Harold long before I'd realized. Maybe he'd been keeping watch all along. "Mom," Tessa said softly, showing me her screen, "you should see this." It was a breaking news report. The Meadow Ridge Development Company, the same name from those old photos, had just filed for bankruptcy. The owner's name? A holding firm run by none other than Hastings' old partner. "Looks like they're fallen apart," I muttered. "Yeah," Tessa said, "but that means they're desperate." She wasn't wrong. 2 nights later, I was woken by the sound of tires crunching gravel outside. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the flashlight and looked out the window. Just a truck idling by the gate, headlights off. After a few seconds, it backed away slowly and disappeared down the road. I didn't sleep a wink after that. The next morning, I called Ray. "They were out here last night. Same model truck Hastings drove." He sighed. "Could be coincidence, but lock your doors. I'll have someone swing by." After I hung up, Tessa came down the stairs, worry written all over her face. "Mum, maybe we should leave for a while. Go stay with Aunt Lila." I shook my head. "This is my home, Tess. I've been running from storms all my life. Not this one, not again." That day, I buried Harold's evidence box under the old oak near the back of the property, same place where he used to bury our time capsules when Tessa was little. I wrapped it in thick plastic and marked the spot with a flat stone, one that read, Harper, 1974s. When I came back inside, Tessa was sitting at the table with a small notebook open. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe we should tell our story, like actually tell it. Not just to the cops, but to everyone. People need to know what happened here." I stared at her for a long moment. "You mean go public?" "Yeah," she nodded. "If they try to silence us again, at least the truth will already be out there." I thought about all those women I'd known through the years, widows, mothers, neighbours, who'd been pushed off their land because somebody richer decided they wanted it. Harold always said the only real weapon poor folks had was their story. "All right," I said quietly. "Let's do it." Over the next few days, we started recording. I sat by the window with the mountains behind me, telling everything from the start. Harold's first deal, the man who became Hastings, the threats, the lies, the key, the truth that finally came to light. Tessa edited it, posted it online, and within a week it spread like wildfire. Comments poured in from all over, folks who'd been cheated, bullied, or swindled by developers just like him. Some of them thanked me, some just said it made them feel less alone. It was strange how sharing the pain could turn into something powerful. Like maybe Harold's fight had rippled farther than I'd ever imagined. But peace still didn't come easy. One afternoon, as I was hanging laundry on the line, I noticed something carved into one of the wooden clothespins, small but clear. 3 letters, MH. My stomach dropped. It wasn't over. Not yet. That night, I went out with a flashlight and walked the perimeter of the property. I didn't see anyone, but I could feel it. That prickling sense you get when you're being watched. Somewhere out there in the dark, someone was keeping tabs on me. When I came back inside, Tessa was sitting up, eyes wide. "Mom, you okay?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, baby. Just making sure the past stays buried." But deep down, I knew better. Some ghosts don't rest easy, some wait for the next move. And as the wind howled through the trees, I could almost hear Hastings' voice echoing in my mind. Not in fear this time, but as a warning. "Be careful, Nell. People who dig too deep." I looked out at the ridge, moonlight cutting across the old oak. "I'm not scared," I whispered. "Not anymore." Because if they wanted another fight, I'd spent my whole life surviving men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. But this time, I wasn't just defending land, I was defending my legacy. And God help the fool who tried to take it again. The moment the gunshot echoed through the valley, I knew peace was gone for good. It wasn't close, more like a warning, somewhere deep in the woods. I froze on the porch, laundry basket in my arms, eyes locked on the tree line. The air felt heavy, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Tessa ran out behind me. "Mom, what was that?" "Get inside," I said sharply, setting the basket down. "Now!" She obeyed without arguing. It wasn't hunting season, and no one local hunted this close to homes. That shot was meant to scare. I locked the door behind us and peeked through the window. The sun was setting, washing everything in gold and orange, peaceful if you didn't know what came before it, but I knew when something wasn't right. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with Harold's old rifle across my knees, listening to every creak of the house. Around midnight, I saw headlights flash once through the trees, Far off, but deliberate. Someone was testing my nerves. The next morning, Sheriff Ray came by. He looked older than I remembered, worry carved deep into his face. "You sure it wasn't a hunter?" I shook my head. "I've lived here 40 years, Ray. That shot was meant for my ears." He sighed and rubbed his jaw. "I'll send a cruiser by for a few nights. But between you and me, Nell, this ain't just about Hastings anymore." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "That development company he worked for. They weren't the only ones trying to buy up land here. There's another outfit circling around, one with more money and less patience." "So they're trying to scare me off," I said quietly. Ray nodded. "I think so, but they'll find out soon enough. You don't scare easy, they'll learn." After he left, I went up to Harold's study, a small room tucked beneath the roof, filled with dust and memories. I hadn't touched most of his things since he passed. His old map of the ridge still hung on the wall, pins marking every trail and cabin. As I looked closer, I noticed something I'd never seen before, a tiny red circle drawn near the eastern boundary. Inside it, Harold had scribbled 2 words, "Old Well." I remembered that well. It was half covered by weeds, maybe 100 yards past the oak tree. We used to draw water from it back before the town hooked up the plumbing. I hadn't thought about it in years. But why would Harold mark it? Curiosity got the better of me. That afternoon, I grabbed my gloves and headed out. The air was crisp, the leaves crunching under my boots. When I reached the old well, the boards covering it were still there, cracked, mossy, but intact. I pried one loose and peered down into the dark. At first, I saw nothing but shadow. Then, just barely, something caught the light, a faint metallic glimmer. I lowered a flashlight, heart pounding. Down at the bottom, half buried in dirt, was a metal box. I laughed under my breath. "Harold, you clever man." It took me nearly an hour to haul it up. The hinges were rusted, but when I cracked it open, I found stacks of old folders, deeds, letters, receipts. At the very top was a sealed envelope with my name written on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Harold's handwriting flowed across the page. "If you're reading this, Nell, it means you found the last of what I hid. I didn't tell you about the well because it was safer that way. Inside this box are the original contracts for the Ridge properties before the fake transfers. These papers prove the entire development deal was fraudulent from the start. If anything ever happens to me, show them to the press, not the law. Money runs the law, but truth runs the people." By the time I finished reading, I was shaking. This wasn't just about me or the mountain house anymore. This was about every family that got cheated off this land. When I got back home, Tessa was waiting by the door. "Mum, where were you?" "I've been worried sick." I showed her the box. "Your daddy left us one last gift." She helped me spread everything out across the table. The evidence was airtight. I could see the headlines already, but before we could act, there was a knock on the door. 3 sharp raps. I motioned for Tessa to stay quiet and peeked through the curtain. A man in a dark coat stood on the porch, hat pulled low. I didn't recognize him. He spoke through the door, his voice deep and polite, but with a cold edge. "Mrs. Harper, my name's Collins. I represent the new ownership of the Meadow Ridge properties. I believe you have something that belongs to us." My stomach tightened. "Sorry," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You've got the wrong house." He smiled faintly. "We both know Mr. Hastings kept very detailed files. It would be unfortunate if those ended up in the wrong hands." Tessa's hand gripped my arm. I could feel her shaking. I straightened my back. "You will have to get a warrant." He tipped his hat. "We'll see about that." Then he turned and walked away, slow and sure. When the car disappeared down the road, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathless. Tessa whispered, "Mom, what are we going to do?" I looked at the box. "We're going to finish what your daddy started." That night, we scanned every page, uploaded copies to a cloud drive, and sent duplicates to 2 journalists, one local, one national. The press could move faster than the courts. By dawn, the first article went live. Within hours, it spread across social media. Words like corruption, fraud, and land grab flashed everywhere. And my name, Nell Harper, was right there with them. Tessa looked at me, half proud, half afraid. "You just went to war, Mom." I smiled softly. I just told the truth. The phone started ringing non-stop. Reporters, lawyers, even neighbors. Some called me brave, others called me crazy. But for the first time in months, I didn't care what anyone thought. By evening, I stood on the porch again, watching the sunset over my mountain. The sky was streaked with red and gold, the kind of color that made you believe in second chances. Then I heard the crunch of gravel again. Another car. My heart jumped, but when I looked, it wasn't Collins or the sheriff. It was an unmarked SUV. The door opened, and two men stepped out in suits. One held a folder. "Mrs. Harper?" I nodded, cautious. He smiled kindly. "I'm with the state attorney's office. We'd like to discuss your evidence." "Seems you just brought down one of the biggest fraud rings in the region." I blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Tessa came running out. "You mean it's over?" The man nodded. "It's just beginning. But thanks to you, we've got what we need." As the sun dipped behind the ridge, I looked out across the land my husband built, the one my daughter had nearly sold, and whispered, "We did it, Harold." And for the first time in a long, long while, the mountain felt peaceful again. I never thought peace would sound like silence. Not the kind of silence that follows heartbreak, but the soft, breathing kind where the world finally lets you rest. These days, when the wind slides through the pines and brushes the porch rail, it feels like the mountains whisper in, "Thank you." It's been 6 months since everything came to light, 6 long, heavy, cleansing months. The fraud ring's been dismantled, the trials are underway, and the state declared my land, every acre of it, legally mine again. They even offered restitution, though no amount of money could buy back the nights I sat awake, wondering if I'd lose the last piece of my life. Tessa moved back in for a while after the investigation ended. She said she wanted to help me get settled again, but I think deep down she needed to feel forgiven. I didn't blame her for what happened. Not anymore. The hurt she caused nearly broke me, but I could see now that her betrayal came from desperation, not malice. She thought selling the house would free her, not destroy us both. One evening, we sat on the porch together, cups of tea warming our hands as the sun melted behind the ridge. Tessa looked out at the horizon, voice soft. "You ever think Daddy knew all this would happen?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm sure he did. Your father was always 3 steps ahead, even from the grave." She laughed quietly, then her eyes welled up. "I'm sorry, Mum, for all of it." I reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to keep apologizing. What matters now is you learned something from it. We both did." She nodded, staring out at the gold light fading over the hills. "You ever think about selling? I mean, now that it's worth so much?" I chuckled. "This land's got too much of your daddy's sweat and my tears mixed in with the dirt. It's not just property, it's our story." We sat there a long while, listening to the crickets tune up for the night. I felt the ache of age in my bones, but for once it didn't bother me. There's a strange kind of power that comes when you survive what should have destroyed you. Like every scar's just proof that you made it through. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail, thick envelope, government seal. Inside was a formal acknowledgement from the state attorney, thanking me for my courage and cooperation. But what caught me was the last line, "Your testimony has already inspired several property owners to come forward. You've started something much bigger than you realize." I read that line 3 times before setting it down. Started something. Maybe that's what Harold wanted all along. Maybe the real inheritance he left wasn't just money or deeds. It was the reminder that dignity has to be defended, no matter how small the piece of earth you're standing on. That night, I sat alone in Harold's study, looking through old photographs. One caught my eye. The 3 of us at the cabin years ago. Tessa couldn't have been more than 8, sitting on Harold's shoulders, both of them grinning like fools. My eyes blurred, and I whispered into the stillness, "We did it, love. Your mountain's safe." The next morning, I got up early and baked biscuits, just like Harold used to love. I packed a few in a tin, wrapped them up with one of his old handkerchiefs, and hiked up the ridge. The air smelled of pine and rain, fresh and clean. When I reached the oak tree, I stopped. The stone where I'd buried the evidence box months ago still stood, weathered now, but strong. I placed the biscuit tin beside it, laid my hand on the stone, and said a prayer. Not for justice this time, but for peace. As I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. A small sprig of green pushing up right next to the stone. It was a sapling, barely 6 inches tall, roots tangled with the soil where Harold's box lay buried. I knelt down, brushed my fingers against its leaves, and smiled. "Guess you're still watching out for us, huh? I didn't need to dig up the past anymore. It had already grown into something new." A few weeks later, Tessa left for the city again. But this time, it was different. She hugged me tighter than she ever had before. "Mom, I'll be back soon," she promised, "but I want to make something of myself first." "You made me believe I still can." I kissed her forehead. "Go make me proud, baby. Just don't forget where you come from." When her car disappeared down the winding road, I stood there a long time, listening to the wind in the trees. The mountain house behind me stood tall, repainted, repaired, alive again. It wasn't just my home anymore, it was my victory. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, the sun setting just right over the ridge. I thought about all the women who'd written to me after my story went public, mothers, widows, daughters. So many had said the same thing: "You gave me courage." I never asked to be anyone's inspiration, I just wanted my peace back. But maybe that's how healing starts, not by shouting, not by fighting, but by standing your ground with quiet grace until the world remembers your worth. Sometimes I still hear Harold's voice in the wind, low and steady. "You did good, Nell. You didn't let him take what mattered." And I whisper back, "I learned from the best." Now, when I look out across the mountain, I don't see loss anymore. I see legacy. I see a woman who refused to bow to betrayal, who turned heartbreak into armor and pain into purpose. The mountain stands, rooted, enduring, unmovable. And so do I. I reckon life's funny that way. You spend years thinking survival means holding on tight, but sometimes it's about letting go, of anger, of guilt, of everything that kept you from breathing free. That's what I did. I let it all go. And when I finally did, the mountain, my mountain, answered back with silence, the kind that means peace, not emptiness. So if you ever find yourself staring down the edge of loss, remember this: sometimes the ending isn't about what you lose, but what you learn to keep. I kept my dignity, I kept my land, and, somehow, I kept my heart open. That's what Harold would have wanted. The mountain stands, and so does Grandma Nell. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story, my dear. Tell me, which city or town are you listening from? I love reading your comments and hearing where everyone's tuning in. If this story touched your heart, you can show a little love by tapping that super thanks. It truly helps me share more stories with you. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. And before you go, don't forget to check out the 2 stories on your screen. I know you'll love them. Make sure to subscribe so we can spend more cozy evenings together. With all my love, Grandma Nell.